My name is Dylan Brooks. I'm 38, an engineer by trade, and until recently I would have told you I had a quiet life. Not perfect, never is, but steady. Predictable. I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona with my wife Kristen and our 2 kids, Jake and Liana. We had a modest 2-story house with white shutters and a creaky porch swing Kristen insisted we never fix because old things have character. We had character, all right. Or at least, I thought we did. It all began to unravel on my birthday. I hadn't planned anything elaborate. Birthdays after 30 lose their glow, especially with a job that eats away your daylight and kids who only care about the cake. Still, I'd left the office a few hours early just to have dinner with the family, maybe catch the second half of a movie once the kids went to bed. Nothing grand. I even picked up a chocolate cake on the way, our tradition since Kristen and I got married 12 years ago. But I never made it to the front door. As I pulled onto our street, I saw our SUV parked weirdly at the edge of the driveway. Not in its usual spot by the garage, but further out, angled under the glow of the lone street lamp that flickered now and then. At first, I figured Kristen must have left it there in a rush. But then I noticed the shape of 2 figures near the passenger side. I slowed down instinctively. That's when I heard her voice. Even from the car, with the window cracked, I recognized her laugh. Not the polite chuckle she used with neighbors or the exasperated sigh laugh she gave the kids. No, this was her soft, melodic laugh. The one from our early days. It stopped me cold. My foot hovered over the brake. And then, as I pulled in, I saw him. He was leaning toward her, tall and confident, like he belonged there. Broad shoulders in a crisp shirt, sleeves rolled up just enough to show he wasn't some desk jockey. Kristen stood close, too close. He reached an arm around her shoulder in a way that wasn't casual. It wasn't lewd or obvious either. That's what made it worse. It was practiced. Familiar. An asterisk mate. The kind of half-embrace you give someone you've held before. Then he leaned in toward her face. I couldn't see his expression, but Kristen's eyes darted past his shoulder and locked with mine. And just like that, she stepped back. 2 feet, maybe 3. Like she remembered something or someone too late. The man didn't flinch. He turned to look at me, gave a brief nod like he was just another friendly neighbor, then walked off without a word. No guilt in his eyes. No shame. I sat in the car a moment longer than necessary. The cake box felt heavier in my lap. My hand trembled slightly as I turned off the engine. I got out slowly, taking in the sight of Kristen smoothing her hair and adjusting her blouse like she was resetting a scene. The porch light illuminated her face just enough for me to see that her expression was already rehearsed. Hey, she said with forced cheer, like I hadn't just watched a stranger lean in for what looked a lot like a kiss. You're home early. Wanted to surprise you, I said, setting the cake on the porch railing. Thought we could eat together. Oh yeah. That's sweet. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, looking anywhere but my face. That was Martin. My boss. He gave me a ride back. Last-minute client meeting downtown. I didn't say anything. Just waited. We wrapped late and I didn't want to drive all the way back on my own in traffic, so I called him. You know how he is Mr. Workaholic. She laughed again, but it didn't sound the same this time. What was that? I asked quietly. Outside. The hug. Oh. She blinked. That was just a thank you. He's touchy like that. You know, East Coast guy. They're more physical, I guess. I raised an eyebrow. You've never mentioned that before. Kristen shrugged. It's harmless. You're overthinking it. Maybe I was. Or maybe I wasn't. But something about the way she said it, fast, clipped, too tidy, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Inside the house, the kids were watching TV. Liana gave me a quick hug and went back to her cartoon. Jake barely looked up. The house smelled like microwave popcorn and the faint floral scent of Kristen's new perfume. It was stronger than the one she used to wear, heavier, more adult. We sat down for dinner. I asked how her day went. She told me about a tough pitch and how the campaign deadline had been moved up. Said she was exhausted. I watched her fork her salad absently, her eyes drifting to her phone every couple of minutes. I wanted to let it go. To write it off as my imagination running wild. But something in my chest wouldn't settle. It was like a thread had been tugged somewhere deep inside me and I couldn't unfeel the unraveling. Later that night, as she showered, I stood by the window looking out at the driveway. Her SUV was still angled wrong. The street lamp flickered again, throwing long shadows across the pavement. I thought about the man. Martin. Her boss. The way he hadn't flinched when I caught him with his arm around my wife. I used to believe we were the kind of couple that survived anything. Bills, sick kids, layoffs, we'd seen our share. But that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a decade, doubt. And not just in Kristen. In everything. It wasn't what she said. It was how easily she said it. How naturally the lie rolled off her tongue. I didn't bring it up again. Didn't press her. Not that night. But something had changed. And I felt it in my bones. After that night, my birthday, I kept trying to tell myself it was nothing. Kristen had always been social, always had guy friends. The kind of woman who high-fived baristas and remembered our mailman's birthday. But the longer I let that moment replay in my head, the more it twisted into something darker. That hug. The way she pulled back when she saw me. The too smooth excuse. It all felt prepackaged. The next morning, I woke up before her. I stood in the kitchen, sipping my coffee in silence, listening to the hum of the fridge and the kids getting ready upstairs. Kristen eventually came down in a rush, muttered something about a presentation, kissed my cheek, and grabbed her keys. Her perfume lingered long after she'd gone, sharp, musky, unfamiliar. She used to wear something light and citrusy. Now, it smelled like a department store's night section. I told myself not to spiral. I even tried journaling, something my therapist had once suggested years back when I had trouble sleeping after my father passed. I sat at the kitchen table and wrote, "You trust her. Don't invent stories." But right below that, without meaning to, I scribbled, "Do you really?" In the weeks that followed, patterns began to surface. Or maybe they were always there, and I had simply refused to see them. Kristen's weekends, once our sacred time for errands and pancakes and family hikes, began disappearing. Team building, she'd call it. The firm's restructuring, we have to be agile. I remember the exact phrase because she repeated it like a talking point. I asked her once if spouses were invited to these retreats, and she laughed, saying, "God, no. You'd be bored to tears." Sometimes she'd be gone overnight, texting me pictures from hotels that all looked the same, 10 conference rooms, generic lobby art, a half-eaten fruit platter next to a laptop. The timestamps didn't make sense. Once, she claimed to be in Tucson for a strategy meeting, but when I asked how the drive was, she blinked and said, "Oh, I flew." Last-minute booking? Kristen hated flying. Her wardrobe changed too. Gradually at first, then all at once. Clothes with sharper lines, bolder colors. Dresses I'd never seen before, still with tags. And high heels, ones she used to complain about wearing, now lined up like soldiers at the bottom of our closet. One evening, I found a lace bralette tucked behind the towels. It wasn't for comfort. And I knew it wasn't for me. She also changed how she moved through the house. Her phone, once left on counters or charging beside the bed, now traveled with her room to room. It was always dying. Always on silent because of meetings. Once, she left it unlocked on the coffee table while she went to check the laundry, and I, against every moral bone in my body, peeked. Just a glance. The chat apps were all clean. No messages. No missed calls. Too clean. I noticed she had recently installed an encrypted messenger, one I didn't recognize. I remember just staring at the icon, heart pounding, and then quickly setting the phone back before she came in humming a tune that sounded too light, too forced. The worst moment came a week after Jake's birthday. She'd forgotten it. Not completely, she remembered at the last minute and called during dinner, blaming a client emergency. Said she'd make it up to him with a special outing. Jake didn't say much. He just poked at his spaghetti and shrugged. Liana, sharp as ever, asked, "Does Mom not like birthdays anymore?" I had no answer. That night, Kristen didn't come home until nearly 1 a.m. She crept into bed without turning on the lights, but I wasn't asleep. I lay there with my eyes closed, breathing slow and steady, listening to the faint sound of her unzipping something, setting her phone face down on the nightstand, and slipping under the covers without a word. She didn't reach for me. I started paying attention to things I never thought I'd have to. Her laptop, for one. Kristen used to be terrible at tech. She hated passwords, used the same one for everything, and frequently asked me to reset her Wi-Fi. Now, her MacBook required a fingerprint or Face ID, and I noticed she started taking it with her even to the bathroom. "Work stuff," she said when I asked. "Sensitive accounts. New policies." She'd changed. I had to admit that. But what was worse, so had I. I started double-checking her calendar entries on the fridge, trying to match them to her actual movements. Once, she said she was meeting a client for dinner near Sedona, but the restaurant she named had closed 3 months earlier. When I brought it up casually, "Hey, didn't that place shut down?" She blinked, paused, and said, No, they reopened." Soft launch. "You probably didn't hear." I nodded. Of course I nodded. I always nodded. I tried to convince myself this was just stress. People reinvent themselves under pressure. Maybe the campaign she was leading had truly consumed her. Maybe she needed to feel confident **XY, powerful, and I, dull in my routine, had failed to see her slipping away. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I poured a glass of bourbon and walked into our home office. Kristen had been working there earlier, and her tablet, a dusty, older one we used to keep on the kitchen counter, was sitting plugged into the outlet, screen still glowing. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. My hand hovered over it. And then I turned it on. The home screen was cluttered. Old photos, outdated apps. I tapped into the messages icon and my stomach lurched. There, in plain view, was a chat thread with someone saved only as M. The conversation wasn't long, but it was enough. Flirty emojis. Last night was amazing. A mention of a bottle of wine and room 212 again? One photo showed Kristen with tousled hair and a hotel pillow behind her, clearly snapped without makeup, but smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. My hands went numb. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I set the tablet down quietly, like it might break if I moved too fast. My mind was static. Everything else faded, the sound of the clock, the hum of the fridge, the soft creak of pipes. And then something inside me cracked, not like a bone, but like an old foundation. Subtle. Silent. Irreversible. I walked upstairs, lay down beside Kristen, and stared at the ceiling for hours. Something was broken. And this time I couldn't lie to myself anymore. 2 weeks after my birthday, I found proof. Not hints, not suspicions, proof. And the worst part? It came when I wasn't even looking. That morning started like most others. Kristen left early, claiming she had a breakfast meeting with a new client. She wore a dark green dress I'd never seen before and heels that clicked too confidently on our wooden floors. She kissed me on the cheek, not the lips, and said, "Wish me luck." "Good luck," I replied. The words felt foreign in my mouth. After she left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the same cereal box I'd been staring at for days. Everything felt like wallpaper now, flat, predictable. I had meetings of my own that day, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break. I was working from home, on a deadline for a client in Denver, buried in CAD diagrams, when I noticed something odd. Kristen's old tablet, an outdated Samsung we hadn't used since before Liana was born, was sitting on the coffee table, screen dark. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe one of the kids had pulled it from the drawer. But when I picked it up, the charging icon flashed on. And then the screen lit up with a new notification. It was a chat message. From the same contact I'd seen before. Got the suite again. Can't wait. I froze. The last time I saw those initials, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. This time, the tablet was in my hand, the message blinking at me like it had waited for this moment. I tapped the screen and the old password prompt appeared. And to my horror, or maybe to my grim relief, it accepted the one password Kristen used for everything before she got serious about security. I was in. The chat thread was long. Longer than I expected. At first, I only skimmed. Scrolling rapidly, numb to what I already knew was true. But then I made myself go back. I forced my eyes to read each line, each timestamp, each awful emoji. It had started at least 3 months ago. Casual jokes, clever banter, inside references I didn't understand. Mentions of projects, office politics, and then it turned. The language shifted. One message read, "Still thinking about last Saturday. You really wore me out." Smirking face. Another said, "Got us the same room this weekend. Pack that little red thing if you haven't tossed it yet." I stopped scrolling. My thumb hovered over a photo thumbnail. I didn't want to open it. My mind screamed not to. But I tapped it anyway. The image loaded slowly. Kristen was lying on a hotel bed, wrapped in sheets, her hair a mess, makeup slightly smeared. Beside her was a man, shirtless, with stubble and a smug smile. His arm was around her bare shoulder. They looked relaxed. Familiar. Like they'd done this many times. I set the tablet down on the couch and sat across from it. My breathing was shallow. The room felt small. I didn't yell, didn't break anything. I didn't even cry. It was like watching a house burn down from the outside, mine, but I couldn't do anything to stop it. I stayed there for what must have been hours, staring at the coffee table, replaying every excuse she'd given me since that night by the SUV. The way she deflected. The way she turned her body away from me in bed. The last-minute work trips, the dresses, the passwords. All of it was real now. Not paranoia. Not insecurity. Truth. And with truth comes consequence. By morning, I was gone. I didn't say anything to the kids. I didn't leave a note. I packed a bag, passport, documents, laptop, flash drive, a few clothes, and drove. I left my phone on the kitchen counter. Turned it off. The silence was deafening but clean. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew where I wasn't staying. I headed north. Through the desert, past the edge of Utah, into Idaho, and finally Montana. I didn't check in with anyone. I didn't call Kristen. I didn't even check my email until I was halfway through Wyoming. When I finally pulled into Bozeman, it was cold. A soft snow was falling, thin and uncertain like the beginning of winter. I rented a month-to-month apartment just outside town, above a bakery that opened at 5 a.m. every day. The smell of fresh bread became my morning ritual. That and rebuilding. That week, I dusted off my old sketches, designs I'd stored away years ago when Kristen convinced me they were cool but not marketable. They were experimental solar panel units, adaptable for low-infrastructure homes. Something I'd been passionate about since grad school but never pursued seriously. I had them all backed up on a hard drive. I started reworking the plans, updating the specs. It was something to do with my hands, with my brain. Something that wasn't her. A few days later, I reached out to Lucas, a college friend turned corporate attorney in Portland. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I explained my situation, he didn't hesitate. "You want to make something big?" he asked. "No," I said. "I want to take something away." He didn't ask what I meant. Just said, "I'll send the paperwork." We formed Northspa Holdings. Quiet. Clean. Through shell purchases and layered LLCs, I began acquiring shares in a digital ad tech conglomerate, one that owned BlazeSync, Kristen's firm. It wasn't revenge. Not at first. It was just an idea. But it grew. Lucas guided me through every step. We set up licensing for my tech designs, filed for patents, opened overseas accounts. I sold my first solar project to a Scandinavian firm for $1.2 million. The next month, a startup in Colorado offered triple that for exclusive regional use. And all the while, Kristen didn't know where I was. She sent emails, voicemails, even tried reaching my sister. I ignored all of it. I wasn't hiding. I was building. And with each week, with each deal, the pain dulled into something like clarity. Then one day, Lucas called with a simple update. "You now own 31% of Midlight Group," he said. "Congratulations." Midlight was the parent company of BlazeSync. Kristen's world, her job, her boss, her security was now partly in my hands. And no one knew it yet. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. In Bozeman, I became someone new, not overnight, but steadily. The Dylan that Kristen knew, the one who took out the trash every Tuesday and apologized for interrupting her Zoom calls, began to disappear. In his place, someone quieter emerged. Not colder. Just less naive. The apartment above the bakery was small, one bedroom, one window, one kettle that whistled too early in the morning. But it was mine. I bought second-hand furniture, a new mattress, and a desk that I set against the east wall where the morning light spilled in like a promise. Each day, I worked in silence, pouring myself into something I'd long abandoned, innovation. The solar panel concepts I'd shelved years ago, modular, adaptive, off-grid units, became my focus. I refined them, modeled new versions, filed for updated patents under Northspa Holdings. I poured every ounce of pain into something practical. Something clean. Every blueprint I sketched felt like a stitch in a wound. Lucas was a lifeline. He didn't pry, which I respected. But he was ruthless with legal architecture. Northspa wasn't just a company, it was a fortress. Every LLC we formed, every subsidiary that bought shares, every blind trust we created, it all served one purpose: to make me invisible and untouchable. The first acquisition was small. A 6% stake in BlazeSync's parent company, Midlight Group. Lucas called it surgical. Within a month, it was 11%. Then 18%. By the time we crossed 30%, the boardroom whispers had started, but they didn't know who was behind it. That was the point. Meanwhile, I hired a private investigator named Henry Lang. A quiet man with a limp and an obsession with detail. He had once worked corporate fraud cases in Seattle. Now he freelanced for selective clients. I gave him Kristen's name, Martin's full profile, and every suspicion I had bottled up since the night in our driveway. Henry didn't disappoint. He traced hotel reservations tied to Martin's personal card. Rooms booked under corporate cover, often during supposed off-site weekends. One of the receipts was for a luxury hotel in Sedona. Dated the same weekend Kristen told me she was attending a regional leadership summit. He found photographs, security cam footage of Kristen and Martin entering through a side door at 11:46 p.m. She was laughing. He was holding her hand. Then came the bank records. Kristen had opened a secondary account, a separate checking account under her name only, routed through a credit union neither of us ever used. Large deposits had been made monthly, labeled as consulting bonuses. Henry traced the source to BlazeSync, but not through her regular payroll. Instead, the money had been funneled through a dummy project Martin approved, a campaign that didn't exist. Fraud. On company time. On company books. Henry handed me the full report one rainy Thursday. He didn't say much, just slid the folder across the cafe table and said, "You'll want to read page 9. Page 9 broke something in me, but not in the way I expected. It was a transcript of a recorded call, Martin and Kristen, discussing how to handle a looming audit. Kristen's voice was hesitant. Martin's was calm, almost rehearsed. "If this goes bad, you're not taking the fall for me," Kristen said. To which Martin replied, "Relax, this buttoned up. Besides, the board loves you." They did, until I became the board. The next shareholder meeting was scheduled for November. I didn't plan to attend it physically. Northspa's proxy agent, an old Stanford connection of Lucas's, would vote on my behalf. But the board already knew my name by then. Kristen's name, too. They had seen the audit. They had received copies of Henry's report. Quietly, Martin was placed under internal review, suspended with pay. The memo was clean. The real reason was not. 2 days later, Kristen found me. Not physically. She didn't know where I was yet. But she found out about Northspa, about the shares, about the audit. She emailed me at my oldest Gmail account, the one I hadn't used since graduate school. I still remember the subject line. "You win." The message was short. "Dylan, I don't know what you're doing or why, but I know it's you. Martin is suspended. HR is freaking out. BlazeSync is in freefall. I kept your secret. I didn't say your name. But please, whatever this is, stop it. You've made your point. K." She had no idea what my point was. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was balance. The same balance she had destroyed. I didn't reply. 3 days later, I was served papers, Kristen's countersuit. The documents accused me of deliberate sabotage, emotional coercion, and misuse of marital assets for personal gain. There were mentions of her career being irreparably damaged, and claims that I had created a hostile financial environment during our marriage. Her lawyer was bold, clearly unaware of what I had. I sent the countersuit straight to Lucas. His reply was swift and surgical. "We're countersuing for full custody and filing evidence of infidelity, neglect, and professional misconduct. Let her run with it." And we did. The court proceedings began in December. I returned to Flagstaff only once, to testify in person. The hearing was subdued, sterile. Kristen sat across from me in a charcoal blazer, hair pulled back, face tired but composed. She barely looked at me. When the photos were presented, hotel footage, chat logs, payroll irregularities, her composure cracked. Briefly, she bit her lower lip and stared at the table. Her lawyer argued that the affair was personal, irrelevant to the financial questions. The judge disagreed. The line between personal and professional was clear and crossed. I petitioned for full custody of Jake and Liana, citing not just the affair, but Kristen's prolonged absence from the home, missed birthdays, late-night absences, and emotional withdrawal. The psychologist we brought in had interviewed both kids. Jake barely spoke about her. Liana said, and I quote, "Mom's not around anymore." That was the dagger. The preliminary ruling favored me. Sole custody pending final proceedings. Kristen moved out of the house. The kids moved in with me. When she called, I let them decide whether to answer. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they didn't. Liana mostly didn't. Jake asked once, "Is Mom okay?" I said, "I think she's figuring things out." He nodded, then went back to his Lego set. In the quiet that followed, I found space to breathe again. I still lived in Bozeman, still worked from my apartment. But now the kids had rooms down the hall. We made pancakes on Sundays again. I bought a second-hand upright piano and let Liana plunk at it until the keys stuck. Kristen called less frequently. I didn't block her. I didn't need to. I had nothing to prove anymore. The legal battles didn't end after the initial hearing. Kristen might have lost the house and the kids for now, but she wasn't done. Not by a long sh*t. 3 weeks after the custody ruling, her new attorney filed an amended motion, a countersuit seeking restitution for reputational damage, citing willful sabotage of professional standing and misuse of marital assets to enact personal revenge. The documents were thick, padded with vague accusations and speculative timelines that made it sound like I'd spent the last year plotting her downfall like some kind of corporate Bond villain. I didn't panic. I'd expected this. Lucas, as always, was 2 steps ahead. He called me after reading the motion and said, "She's throwing the kitchen sink. Most of it won't stick. But what if some of it does?" I asked. He exhaled. "Then we counter with everything we have. Full transparency. Audit logs, ownership trails, financials. Dylan, she's swinging at shadows. You built a legitimate company. You stayed within the law. This isn't a courtroom drama. It's paperwork." Still, Kristen's filing made headlines in small business circles. BlazeSync was already hemorrhaging clients. Martin had quietly resigned under the pretext of health complications. Internally, his reputation was shredded. The board was publicly vague, but privately scathing. A handful of execs were placed under review. Midlight's stock dipped nearly 12% in 1 quarter. And through it all, Northspa kept growing. I was consulted on 2 new energy startups and named as lead architect for a state-funded sustainable housing project in Montana. My name wasn't tied to the BlazeSync fallout, at least not officially. But insiders started whispering. And Kristen? She became the face of a crisis she didn't understand. She emailed me again. No subject line. "Dylan, I didn't mean for this to get so ugly. You've proven your point. I'm not trying to ruin you, I just want to work. To see the kids. To move forward. Please stop." Kay. I didn't reply. She wasn't trying to ruin me? What did she think the countersuit was? A love letter? But then something shifted. Kristen stopped emailing. She stopped showing up to court. Her lawyer made her appearances, mostly to file delays and extensions, trying to dig up a path forward in a losing case. Kristen's own team had *N distancing themselves from her narrative. The tipping point came when Lucas submitted the full record of her financial misconduct, not just the bonus funneling, but her role in approving ghost vendors under Martin's umbrella. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. We didn't press charges. We didn't need to. We let the board handle that part. BlazeSync conducted its own investigation. Kristen was suspended without pay. The email was cold, just 1 paragraph. Due to ongoing internal review and pending litigation, Kristen Brooks has been placed on indefinite leave. Her duties will be assumed by interim personnel. When I heard about the decision, I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No triumph. Just confirmation that truth, when documented, speaks louder than pleas. Meanwhile, the kids adjusted to their new life. Liana started piano lessons with a retired music teacher who lived 3 doors down. Jake joined a robotics club. I rearranged the apartment to give them real rooms, no more bunking in the same space. They didn't ask about their mom much, though Jake still asked to FaceTime her once or twice a week. She answered every time. Always with a forced smile, always with an upbeat tone. "Hi, my big boy," she'd say. "Mommy misses you." But he'd lose interest after a few minutes. The calls got shorter. Less frequent. Liana, on the other hand, refused to speak to her. "Maybe next time," she'd say every time I asked. Then one Friday, Kristen called me directly. First time in months. I let it ring 4 times before answering. "Dylan," she said. Her voice was quieter than I remembered. Not weak, just smaller. "Hi," I said. "I'm sorry for calling. I saw Jake's drawing from school. The rocket ship. He drew your face in it. He never used to do that." I didn't say anything. "And Liana," she started, then stopped herself. "I missed them." "You had them," I said simply. "I know," she said. Then, after a pause, I didn't know what I was doing. "Not really. Not until Martin left." "Left?" I asked. "He took a consulting job in the UK. Quiet exit. Didn't even tell me until he was gone. His number changed. Email, too." I kept silent. I thought he'd stick around. That we'd figure things out. "You mean build a life?" She hesitated. "No. I don't know. I think I just wanted to feel like I mattered to someone. I don't think I did to him. Not really." "And what about us?" "I don't know," she said. "That's the worst part. I really don't." I let the silence linger. Then I said, "The kids are safe. They're doing well. That's what matters now. I'd like to visit." "You can talk to your lawyer," I said. She didn't argue. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you for picking up." Before she hung up, she added, "Dylan, I never hated you. even when I convinced myself I did. That stuck with me. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't enough. But it was something. By spring, the final hearing approached. Lucas was confident. Kristen's team had dropped most of their claims. The judge requested final statements and documentation. Northspa's books were pristine. My tech company was now valued at over $6.7 million. I had proof of every asset, every transaction. Kristen, by contrast, had a suspension notice, a paper trail of illicit payments, and a dwindling bank account. The court finalized our divorce in April. I received sole custody of both children, with visitation rights for Kristen contingent on psychological counseling and quarterly evaluations. The house, which Kristen had attempted to claim partial ownership of, was granted fully to me. Northspa remained untouched. The court order described our marriage as irretrievably broken. Fitting. After the verdict, I took Jake and Liana to a diner just outside of town. They split a milkshake and argued over whether the waitress looked like someone from a cartoon. I watched them, really watched them, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: weightlessness. That night, Kristen texted me. I got the notice. I understand. Take care of them. Maybe one day they'll understand why I left the way I did. I don't, but maybe they will. K. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. I didn't need explanations anymore. What I needed was what I'd finally started to build. Not revenge. Not a comeback. Not even justice. Just a life. One that was mine again. The weeks after the divorce felt strange. Not empty, just still. Like coming home after a storm and finding everything quieter than it should be. Kristen moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. She didn't fight the custody terms after the ruling. Maybe she was exhausted. Or maybe she finally saw what she'd lost. She called once every few days to ask about the kids, sometimes to speak to Jake. Liana rarely took the phone. She'd either shake her head or quietly walk out of the room. Jake warmed up a bit faster. Kids do that. He asked if he could visit her once. I said yes. He came back after a few hours with a coloring book she'd bought him and stories about her small kitchen, and a cat she didn't own but liked to feed from the windowsill. He didn't ask to go back for a while after that. Meanwhile, I got to work. Not on revenge, not on some grand redemption arc. Just work. Northspa expanded faster than I expected. We partnered with a sustainable housing project in Wyoming and a school initiative in Utah. My designs, those old solar sketches Kristen once called a distraction, were now powering low-income developments across 3 states. I started a tech education fund in my grandfather's name. Not because I had something to prove, but because I remembered what it was like to feel dismissed. I wanted kids like Jake and Liana, and others, to know their ideas mattered. I wasn't trying to punish Kristen anymore. I wasn't trying to win. That part of me, the man who needed to outmaneuver her, to show her what she lost, was fading. What mattered now was what I was building, not what I'd left behind. Still, late at night, I'd catch myself staring at old photos. Of us. Of the life that felt like someone else's memory. There was one, in particular, her holding Liana at the lake, both of them laughing. I kept that one. Not to forgive. Not to forget. Just to remember the version of her that once loved me honestly. 6 months later, the kids and I stood on a stage in Jackson, Wyoming, at the ribbon cutting for a new power-efficient school facility built using Northspa's design. It was cool that morning, the kind of clean mountain air that makes you feel alive. Liana was holding the scissors. Jake clutched the ribbon with both hands like it was treasure. They smiled. I smiled. People clapped. And for once, there was no bitterness behind it. I glanced at the crowd and saw her. Kristen, standing off to the side. No makeup. Simple coat. Eyes full of something I couldn't name. Regret, maybe. Or just distance. She didn't come up. Didn't say anything during the event. But later that night, after the kids were in bed, she stopped by the house. I let her in. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't even cry. She looked around the living room, then said, quietly, "You were better than I ever deserved." I didn't argue. We sat for a while. She asked about Jake's reading level, Liana's piano lessons, I answered. That was all. When she left, she didn't ask for a hug. Didn't ask to stay. Just nodded and walked out. I stood on the back porch for a while after that, sipping coffee, watching the sun dip below the ridge. The kids were asleep. The house was calm. In my drawer, the $10 birthday gift card still sat where I left it, untouched. Not as a wound, but as a marker. A moment where everything broke and where I started to rebuild. Not from anger, not from spite, but from peace. And finally, that was enough.